March 9th, 1983, 1:12 p.m., Oak Ridge Correctional, Visiting Room B. The logbook on the guard's podium said "No weapons" in blue ink, underlined twice, because the warden had been embarrassed the month before when a visitor smuggled in a razor blade inside a Bible. Frank Lucas sat at the bolted plastic table with his sleeves rolled once and his hands flat, palms down, as if he were waiting for paperwork, not trouble. Across from him, Ray McDowell wore a pressed denim jacket that still held the shape of a truck seat, and he smiled like a man who'd never been told no in a small town. Next to Ray, Lester Crowell wore a Sunday face, clean haircut, thin tie, and a visitor badge that he kept rubbing with his thumb like it was a medal. They were Klan men, not the ones in photos with torches, but the ones who handled money, favors, and silence. They had come in on a special administrative visit, approved at 10:08 a.m., stamped by Captain Harold Sykes' office, and they were supposed to come in empty. At 1:13 p.m., Lester stood up and moved behind Frank's chair, close enough that Frank could hear his breathing change. The muzzle of a small pistol pressed against the back of Frank's skull, cold and certain. A mother at the far plexiglass window stopped speaking mid-word. A vending machine hummed. A guard near the door froze with his radio halfway to his shoulder. Ray didn't look shocked. Ray looked satisfied, like a plan had arrived on time. Lester leaned in and whispered, "Don't move." Frank didn't turn. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't beg. He stared at Ray and said, calm, "That ain't supposed to be in here." Ray's smile tightened. "Maybe the rules don't apply today." Frank nodded once, slow, like he was listening to a man explain a bad investment. "Rules always apply," Frank said. "They just apply to somebody else first." Lester pressed the gun harder, trying to squeeze a reaction out of Frank the way a child squeezes a toy. "Shut up," Lester hissed. "Just shut up." Ray slid a folded piece of paper across the table, pushing it until it touched Frank's knuckles. "Sign," Ray said. Frank looked at it without touching it. "What is it?" Ray leaned forward, voice low, heavy with the confidence of a man who'd practiced this in the mirror. "It's permission. A green light. You got people outside. You got reach. We got a man who's been talking. You're going to stop him." Frank finally picked up the paper, unfolded it, and read it like a menu. It was typed on cheap white stock, one paragraph, one name, one blank line, the kind of document that pretended to be legal by using a typewriter. Frank's eyes lifted. "That name is bait," he said. Ray's ring flashed under the fluorescent light when he tapped the table. "That name is a problem," Ray said, "and you're going to solve it." Frank placed the paper down with care, like setting down a glass he didn't trust. "You brought a gun into a no-weapon room," Frank said. "That means you got help." Ray's smile returned, thin as wire. "We got friends," he said. Frank's tone stayed even. "You got an employee," Frank corrected, "and he's going to bury you if you do something loud in front of witnesses." Lester's voice cracked with irritation and fear. "You think you're safe 'cause you talk." Frank spoke to Ray, not Lester, like the gun was a bad smell and Lester was the source. "If that thing goes off in here," Frank said, "you don't walk out. Not because you're scared of me. Because you're scared of paperwork." Ray scoffed, but his eyes flicked toward the door for half a second, a reflex that betrayed him. "You don't know nothing about this building," Ray said. Frank's eyes didn't move. "Wednesday shift," Frank said. "Captain Harold Sykes. Badge 02814. He runs intake on Wednesdays. Today's Wednesday." A guard near the wall shifted his weight, subtle, like he had just been named in church. Ray's mouth didn't change, but the skin around it did. "What about him?" Ray asked. Frank's voice got softer, which made it feel sharper. "I'm going to say his name again," Frank said, "and he's going to hear it from this table, and he's going to know you're sloppy." Lester's gun hand trembled by a millimeter. "Stop talking," Lester whispered. "Less confident now." Frank looked at Ray and said, "You got 90 seconds before somebody decides this is a problem they don't want on their shift report." Ray leaned back, irritated, and made a show of patience. "Talk," Ray said. "But you're signing." Frank nodded as if accepting the time. "You're not here to kill me," Frank said. "You're here to force a choice." You want me to be the hand that does your dirty work, so you can tell yourself you stayed clean. Ray's eyes narrowed. Don't act like you know us. Frank kept going, measured, relentless. If you kill me, Frank said, you turn this room into a crime scene. People ask how a gun got past a no weapon stamp. They ask who signed the visit. They ask who skipped the pat down. And when they ask those questions, you become evidence. Ray's jaw tightened. You calling me evidence? Frank nodded once. You're the receipt, he said. Lester barked a nervous laugh. Man, you crazy. Frank finally turned his head, just enough to catch Lester's reflection in the plexiglass. He didn't look at the gun. He looked at the man holding it, and his expression wasn't fear. It was assessment. You're not leadership, Frank said to Lester's reflection. You're a runner. You're the guy who carries a message and hopes nobody shoots the messenger. Lester stiffened. Ray's eyes snapped to him. What did you say to him? Ray demanded. Lester swallowed hard. Nothing, he said too fast. Frank turned back to Ray. He's proud, Frank said. That's why he keeps rubbing that badge. He wants to be seen in the room. Pride makes men talk when they shouldn't. Ray's ring twisted on his finger once, slow. You stalling, Ray said. Frank didn't deny it. I'm buying you a way out, Frank said. Because if you keep going, the only story left is you in cuffs and your people pretending they don't know you. Ray leaned in, voice low, dangerous. You don't scare me. Frank's answer was immediate. I don't scare robes, he said. I scare men wearing them. For the first time, Ray's confidence wobbled, not because of Frank's tone, but because of the room. Too many eyes, too many ears, too many moving parts. Frank leaned forward an inch, hands still flat. Your contact is the real boss in this moment, Frank said. And he doesn't care if you live. He cares if he stays clean. Ray's lips pressed together. Lester's breathing sped up behind Frank. Name him, Frank said. Ray hesitated, pride wrestling survival. We don't say names, Lester whispered, desperate, trying to recover control. Frank ignored him. If you don't say it, Frank told Ray, they're going to learn it the hard way. When the first report says the weapon was yours and the second report says the visit was requested by you and the third report says nobody remembers your face. Ray swallowed, then spoke like he was spitting out poison. Glenn, he said. Lester's hand jolted. His face went pale in the fluorescent light. Frank nodded once, as if confirming a number he'd already calculated. Glenn set you up, Frank said. Ray's eyes hardened. You don't know Glenn. Frank's tone stayed calm. I know men like Glenn, he said. They shake your hand and count your fingers after. The guard by the door cleared his throat, small, but it cut through the silence. Frank glanced toward the door for half a second. Not a plea, a signal. Captain Sykes, Frank said, clear enough to carry. You might want to come see this. The air snapped. Ray's head turned toward the hallway glass. Lester's gun hand hesitated, and in that hesitation, the power moved. Frank lifted his right hand slowly, palm open, and pointed at the visitor badges on Ray and Lester's chests. Those names are going to look real nice in the incident report, Frank said, calm, almost conversational. Ray's face tightened like he'd been slapped in public. Lester's voice turned thin. Ray, he whispered, they're looking, and they were. Two inmates at a nearby table had turned their bodies fully. A woman behind plexiglass had stopped pretending. Even guards who didn't want to see were now stuck seeing. Ray hissed at Lester, put it away. Lester hesitated, then slid the pistol back into his waistband fast and clumsy, like hiding shame. Frank didn't react like he'd escaped death. He reacted like the meeting had finally started. Ray leaned forward, trying to reclaim ground. You think you flipped this, Ray said. Frank nodded slightly. I moved it, Frank said. I moved the fear. Footsteps hit the hallway, heavy, more than one pair. Guards straightened with that specific posture that meant authority was coming and nobody wanted to be the first to speak. Captain Harold Sykes appeared behind the glass, thick shoulders, gray mustache, darker uniform, the kind of presence that didn't need volume. He walked in at 1:16 p.m. and stopped just inside the door, scanning tables like he was counting mistakes. His eyes landed on the badges, then on Frank, then on Ray. Sykes didn't yell. He didn't posture. He said, "Flat, McDowell. Crowell. Stand up." Ray's voice sharpened. "This is a legal visit." Sykes didn't even look impressed. "Stand up," he repeated. Ray stood slowly, trying to keep dignity. Lester stood too, stiff, eyes darting. Sykes nodded to a guard. "Search them," he said. Ray's jaw clenched. "You can't." The guard's gloved hands moved with procedure. Not rough, not gentle, just inevitable. When the hand hit Lester's waistband, the room made a sound like a single inhale. The pistol came out into the light like a magic trick that wasn't supposed to work. Sykes stared at it, then at Ray, because Ray was the one who thought he could control outcomes. "You want to explain how that got past my front gate?" Sykes asked. Ray's face tightened. "I don't know," Ray said too quickly. Lester blurted, "We were told." Ray snapped, "Shut up." Too late. Panic had already spoken. Sykes' eyes narrowed. "Told by who?" he asked, voice calm enough to be cruel. Ray didn't answer. He couldn't. Not in front of witnesses. Not in front of guards. Not in front of a man who controlled transfers. Frank leaned back slightly and said, as if offering helpful civic advice, "Captain, check the logbook." Sykes' eyes cut to him. "You running your mouth, Lucas?" Frank shrugged. "Just keeping your building from looking stupid," he said. Sykes hated Frank, but he hated embarrassment more. "Bring me the book," Sykes said. A guard moved to the podium. Ray's eyes darted around the room, trapped by the simplest thing, attention. Attention meant questions. Questions meant names. Names meant chains. Sykes stepped closer, voice low. "You walked in under no weapons," he said. "You think I'm going to pretend I didn't see it?" Ray tried to posture. "We got enemies," he said. Sykes stared. "This ain't out there," he said. "This is my house." Then he nodded once. "Cuff them," Sykes said. Metal clicked at 1:18 p.m., sharp in the fluorescent air. Ray's face went hard, a man choking on humiliation. Lester looked like his Sunday face had cracked down the middle. As they were turned toward the door, Frank spoke one sentence, not loud, just clean. "Tell Glenn I said hello." Ray's head snapped around, eyes burning, but behind the anger something else appeared, dread. Because that meant Frank wasn't guessing. It meant Frank knew the inside line. Sykes' gaze flicked toward Frank, suspicious, then back to Ray like he was evaluating a stain. "Move," Sykes ordered. Guards marched Ray and Lester out past tables of men who leaned back to watch, because prisons ran on stories more than rules. The door shut. The room didn't return to normal. It pretended. Phones lifted again. Voices resumed. But everyone had seen two men come in believing they owned the room and leave wearing cuffs. Sykes stayed a beat, staring at Frank like he was staring at a problem that refused to be solved neatly. "You think you're clever," Sykes said. Frank's answer was simple. "I think I'm alive," he said. Sykes' jaw worked. "Who waved them through?" Sykes asked. Frank's eyes stayed flat. "You already know," he said. Sykes' voice sharpened. "I want it said." Frank leaned back and delivered it like a weather report. "In here, you don't need a gun to kill a man," he said. "You just need a name." Sykes stared, then turned away and walked out like he hated that sentence because it was accurate. At 2:48 p.m., Ray McDowell was shoved into a holding cage near intake, wrists still marked by metal, listening to the building talk around him like a living animal. Lester Crowell was placed 2 cells down, separated because systems always separated men who might align their stories. A deputy slid a clipboard under Ray's bars. "Sign," the deputy said. Ray expected local paperwork. Instead, he saw a different seal, a heavier header, and language that tasted like federal attention. "What is this?" Ray snapped. The deputy shrugged. "Federal detainer," he said. "Y'all are staying." Ray's throat tightened. "That's a mistake," Ray said. "Make a call." The deputy smirked. "You already made your call," he said. "You made it in the visiting room." Ray turned his head toward the corridor as if his organization might appear like cavalry. It didn't. The building didn't care about rogues. The building cared about control. In Lester's cell, Panic finally broke through pride. He pressed his forehead to cinder block and whispered prayers like they were passwords. At 3:21 p.m., a guard walked past Ray's cage and stopped, young, too new to be calm. He leaned in and spoke without moving his lips much. "Your number ain't picking up," he muttered. Ray glared. "Call again," he hissed. The guard shook his head. "They told me not to," he whispered. Ray's stomach dropped. "Who told you?" The guard didn't answer. He looked down the hall, toward administration, toward power, then walked away fast. That was the moment Ray understood the real punishment wasn't the cuffs. The punishment was abandonment. Men like Glenn didn't rescue mistakes. They cut them loose and used them as proof of loyalty to someone higher. At 4:05 p.m., in Lester's cell, a voice from the shadows of the adjacent cage laughed low, bored, amused. "Hey, preacher," the voice said. "Say that name again." Lester froze. Because in prison, names weren't just information. Names were knives without blades. By dinner count, word had moved. Not through phones. Through looks, whispers, and the way guards suddenly avoided one particular corridor like it was cursed. Ray's reputation began to rot in real time. The organization he'd counted on would see him as a liability, a man who got caught on camera, a man whose arrogance invited questions. Lester was worse off. Lester had been the one holding the gun. Lester was the one whose hands would be searched first, whose story would crack first, whose fear would make him confess to the wrong years. At 6:19 p.m., a sergeant read Ray a formal warning about contraband and threatened additional charges, because institutions loved stacking consequences. Ray listened, jaw clenched, trying to stay angry instead of afraid. Anger felt like control. Fear felt like truth. He pictured Glenn, the smiling fixer, the guy who promised the front gate was handled, the guy who said, "It'll be clean," the guy who sold certainty like a product. Now Glenn was gone. Not physically gone, just unreachable, which was the same thing. The phone didn't ring. The promised lawyer didn't appear. The friendly deputy didn't slip him a note. Silence did the work that violence used to do. Meanwhile, in cell block D, Frank Lucas lay on his bunk staring at the underside of the metal frame above him. Not celebrating, not smiling, letting the adrenaline drain like dirty water. At 7:02 p.m., a younger inmate on the tier leaned toward the bars and whispered, "Yo, Frank, they really came at you." Frank didn't move. The kid pushed, hungry for meaning. "How you get out of that?" Frank turned his head slightly, enough to show he heard. "I didn't get out," Frank said. "I moved it." The kid frowned. "Moved what?" Frank's voice stayed flat. "The fear," he said. "I moved it off me and onto them." That was the whole trick. He didn't need to win a fight. He needed to change the math of consequences. Guns were immediate, but consequences were long, and Frank had built his life on understanding which men feared which consequences most. Ray feared exposure. Lester feared abandonment. Captain Sykes feared embarrassment and headlines. Glenn feared being named. Frank used the only weapon that worked in every direction: specificity. Badge numbers, shift schedules, a truck description, a plate ending in 7K, the exact day of the week. Those details were hooks in the mind. They made bluff feel like fact. They made everyone in the room picture the report before it existed. By 9:30 p.m., the rumor inside Oak Ridge wasn't that Frank Lucas had almost been executed. The rumor was that 2 Klan shot callers tried to big dog him and ended up in cuffs, and that the captain himself had walked in like a man smelling smoke. Men repeated it with small changes because stories mutated, but the spine stayed true. Klan men came in armed under a no-weapon stamp, and Frank Lucas didn't panic. The prison accepted the lesson the way prisons accepted all lessons, as survival information. Don't bring chaos into a controlled space unless you own the control. Don't trust a fixer who promises miracles. Don't think a symbol protects you when the walls belong to someone else. The next morning, March 10th, 1983, 6:44 a.m., An orderly sweeping the hallway outside records overheard a clerk say Captain Sykes was being reassigned. Not fired, not punished, moved. A different facility, a different shift. Like the system quietly removed a loose bolt before anyone could see the machine wobble. Ray McDowell's visitor privileges were revoked pending investigation. Lester Crowell's case became a small pile of charges that turned a threat into a sentence. Glenn, the unseen hand, stayed unseen because men like Glenn survived by never being the loudest name in any room. But inside Oak Ridge, Glenn's name started traveling anyway, carried by men who needed it for leverage, for protection, for bargaining chips, for entertainment. That was Frank's real revenge. Not blood, not a beating, not a dramatic speech. A name turned into currency, spent and resold until the man behind it felt the heat. Ray McDowell sat in his cage and realized the Klan didn't punish enemies first. It punished failures. Lester Crowell lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, realizing that the preacher's smile didn't mean anything when the doors locked. And Frank Lucas went back to counting days because prison was still prison, but something had changed in the invisible air. People looked at him differently, not like a hero, like a man who understood the building, like a man who could take a gun off his head without touching it. On paper, the incident was simple. Contraband recovered, visitors detained, procedures reviewed. In the hallway, the truth was sharper. Two men tried to turn a visiting room into a throne room, and the prison turned it into a courtroom. That was the shock that spread through the blocks, through the chow hall, through the laundry line, through the quiet places where men traded survival tips. It wasn't a gun. It was the reversal. The realization that power wasn't the loudest threat in the room. Power was the person who could make everyone else picture tomorrow's consequences, right now, in front of witnesses under fluorescent lights at 1:12 in the afternoon when nobody wanted a headline. Frank's final sentence stayed in the air because it was the simplest summary anyone could carry. In here, you don't need a gun to kill a man. You just need a name and the nerve to say it out loud when everyone else is still whispering.